one of the things that Ron DeSantis has done recently is he passed a bill and signed it, which makes an awful lot of sense, to say, hey, if you're under the age of 18, we're not going to allow you in the state of Florida to get so-called gender-affirming care. Note how good they are at naming things. It's not mutilate your bodies. It's gender-affirming care. And for those of you out there who are aware, this is basically the idea that if you're 14 and you decide, hey, I'm a boy in a girl's body, that you don't get to go to a doctor and have them remove your breasts. And it also is the idea of, hey, let's not allow people to get puberty blockers to keep them from becoming, adults, members of the male or female sex post-puberty. So this is relatively uncontroversial, Buck. And we've talked about this on the show, and I do think it's important because we were just talking about the debt ceiling. And I understand that the debt ceiling is a battle, and it's important to restrict federal spending to the best of our ability because we just spent more money trying to fight COVID than we did to beat the Nazis in World War II, and much of that money was wasted. And we've gone from $10 trillion in debt when the Tea Party got all fired up back in 2010, and now we're over $30 trillion in debt. And so there's no end in sight to this. That's an important battle. But it's a battle where you can say, well, should the federal government grow at a 3% rate or a 2% rate? You can argue about that. That's a traditional political battle. To me, Buck, the idea of whether or not you are able to give a 14-year-old surgery to chop their boobs off is truly the difference between right and wrong. And it's important to recognize a couple of things. One, as this whole trans universe continues to spin, the only Democrat that I have heard publicly say men who identify as women shouldn't be able to compete against women in women's athletics is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Not one Democrat elected in the House, not one Democrat elected in the Senate would oppose that idea. It's crazy. But also now this idea of gender-affirming care is absolutely insane. And today at the White House, I believe this is today, Karine Jean-Pierre attacked the idea that you should have to be 18 years old to wait to have surgery that could remove your genitals. Listen.
And there are more than 600 pieces of anti-LGBTQ plus legislation out there. A few hundred of them are anti-trans community. And that matters because we have to call that out. And we've never seen this level. It's historic in the number of pieces of legislation. And I've met a lot of parents of trans kids in the past couple of months who have told me these devastating stories, whether they're in Texas or Oklahoma or wherever they are, saying how they now have to seriously consider leaving their state to protect their child. And that's something that we have to call out and continue to be very clear about, that these are kids. These are our kids. They belong to all of us.
Okay, that is actually from the GLAAD Awards on Saturday with Karine Jean-Pierre. Buck, this is pretty crazy stuff to be saying, hey, we have to call this out. If you're 14 and you want to get your boobs chopped off, this is a human right.
I also always shudder when I hear collectivists, which is what the Democrat Party is comprised of, talking about our kids. No, they are your kids, as in the parents listening to this and parents all across the country. They're your children. They're not, the children of the community. They are not communal, in that sense. And the notion that you're going to frame this debate, right now, if you're Karine Jean-Pierre, as you're going to protect your kids by taking them out of state to get a gender transition. I mean, I think about how much research people that I know who are really squared away when it comes to health and wellness, they'll do before any medical procedure, certainly any surgery. What hospital am I going to? What doctor am I going to go to? What are the long-term complications? What are the prognoses I should expect from this? What are the chances something goes wrong? Is it really worth it to do this? And then compare that with the stories that you can find all over the place of a 12-year-old goes in and there is a conveyor belt of go get your trans surgery. There is we have to affirm this right away. We have to push you. No one's allowed to question this. So think about this. Where else in life would you find yourself in a situation where your life can be radically altered for the future and there's no dissent, there's no outside opposing voices allowed to enter into the conversation, right? There are so many. I mean, think about all the time people spend, which cancer treatment should I get, for example? How quickly should I move on it? How aggressive should we be? With trans issues, the left has decided, get the kids to chop themselves up and take the drugs as quickly as possible. No questions asked. Push it forward, get it done. And it is truly monstrous. And that Karine Jean-Pierre and these others talk about this stuff like, there was some big study that just came out of adults. You might have seen this, Clay. Of adults, 30% of them go off the hormones and are at least in some state of detransition because they hate it so much.
Yeah.
What are the chances that people would, you start to look at the long-term prognosis for mental health, for physical health, for adults. You're doing this to kids, even at a more formative stage. We have to keep fighting on this issue because it's obviously critical to the agenda of the left, and I think it's evil. I really think it's evil. I think that's the appropriate word for it.
I think it is the appropriate word, Buck. And I would just build on that a little bit. How many of you out there had decisions when you were 14 or 15 that you look back on and you're like, I can't believe I did that? 14, 15, 16. Many of these treatments sterilize children for life. The idea that at 14, 15, or 16, you would voluntarily undergo a treatment that would prevent you from ever becoming a dad or a mom is barbaric. I can't believe that this is even in a intelligent society a position that anyone could adopt. And yet it is dogma now for the Democrat Party that you are not allowed to question, to the extent you just heard from Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, basically trying to say it's barbaric to not be allowing these surgeries to take place. And building on that in a larger context, when you are forcing someone to accept a fundamental untruth, which is, hey, you can change your gender, I really think the conversation needs to shift from adults can make choices. And Buck, you pointed out, a lot of those adults even end up regretting the choices that they are making, because the question we really should be asking, I think, is what have we created in our society that so many kids are so profoundly unhappy in their own bodies that they think the only way they can be happy is by changing their gender? Because, when you're a teenager, you vacillate oftentimes, your emotions, your biochemistry, everything else. One reason that teenagers are so moody is because there's so much, biochemistry working with puberty and everything that's going on there. And oftentimes you end up in a situation where you feel like you need to take some grand gesture. I'm going to call her out here for a sec. Our producer, Allie, she said off the air, Buck, she was in a goth chick back when she was in, did you know this? Producer Allie was, I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Allie, was a goth chick when she was in high school. There's a lot of people out there listening to us right now that look at their high school class photos. My kids make fun of my high school class photos all the time because of the hair choices I made, the clothes choices I made. But you make sometimes choices and you're able to go back and you laugh at them and you say, boy, remember when I was dressing up like a vampire for a while? Or I was an emo person, or whatever you might be, right? You grow into adulthood and you end up looking back at some of the decisions you made when you were a teenager and thinking, boy, that was really dumb. This is why we don't let people get tattoos, right? Can you imagine being 24 and looking back and saying, boy, that decision in retrospect to chop my boobs off probably wasn't a good one? Like, irreversible, awful decisions should be opposed by anyone with a functional brain in America. And very often these are irreversible, awful decisions.
There's an additional layer of this that I think never gets enough attention. By telling these 12-year-olds, for example, you tell a 12-year-old, take the hormone blockers, have the surgery, now, and maybe finish some of it when you get a little older, or whatever it may be. If you're a little boy and you think you're a girl, or you're a little girl and think you're a boy, let's assume little boy who thinks he's a girl. You're 12 years old. They tell you, do this because that's affirming who you are. Do they tell them that no one is actually going to really think they're a girl for the rest of their lives? Do they tell them that this is all a lie that we are made to play along with, some kind of really twisted and evil joke that people are going to walk around. They're not going to say, oh, look at that little girl or look at that young woman. They're going to say, look at that individual who something's going on there.
Yeah.
They're not going to say it's a girl. They're not going to believe that it's a woman. That doesn't happen. And I know that people like to say, oh, but it's the surgeries are getting better and better. Well, who is the person going to date? How is that going to work? How are you going to explain this to possible mates? Does anyone tell the 13-year-olds that Karine Jean-Pierre thinks need to be chopping off their breasts and taking hormones right now any of these things? No, they do not. Because this is all about a fashionable belief system for adults who are too cowardly to stand up for children, and sometimes, unfortunately, including children that are theirs. That's just wrong. It's different with adults. With kids, this should be stopped, and I think the states that are taking this and stepping it are doing the right thing.
100%. Just think about it this way. If you were 14 and you'd gotten to pick a tattoo, what percentage of 44-year-olds or 64-year-olds are like, man, that was a great decision I made when I was 14 about that permanent body tattoo I got?